T-Bone is on the other side. T-Bone is on the other side. T-Bone, Prime Cuts, podcast on the other side. T-Bone, Prime Cuts, podcast on the other side. T-Bone, he sets the tone, originates, opinionates. T-Bone, musicality, originality, any day of the week. Prime Cuts, podcast on the other side. T-Bone, Prime Cuts, the talk space where musicians matter.
Welcome to T-Bone's Prime Cuts, Episode 8. Today's guest is Daniel DeVisé. Daniel is a writer and a journalist who's worked at the Washington Post, USA Today, the Miami Herald, and 4 other newspapers. He shared a 2001 Teen Pulitzer Prize and garnered more than 24 other national and regional journalism awards. He's written 5 books, including Andy and Don, a book about Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King, and this book we're going to be talking about today, The Blues Brothers, an epic friendship, the rise of improv, and the making of an American film classic. Without further ado, here's Daniel DeVisé. Welcome to T-Bone's Prime Cuts. Our guest today is the author Daniel DeVisé, the author of this great book, The Blues Brothers, an epic friendship, the rise of improv, and the making of American film classic. Welcome, Daniel.
It's great to be here. I've known you for a while, and I've been following your great feed on the Twitter. So it's good.
Thank you.
Connect your face and your voice with that great stuff.
Yeah, my voice is getting some better finally. It was affected with all that stuff. It'll never be as good as it was on the radio, but it's a lot better. You can understand me now. I'm not slurring as much.
No, you're good.
Thanks. I'd like to start because I was surprised, even though I later found out that you followed the formula for your other book on Don Knotts and Andy, the background on Belushi and Aykroyd. I was a little surprised that you started that, but I was so enamored with it.
Well, there's a story there. I will say that at the beginning of this project, my longtime editor at Grove Atlantic, his name's George. He's really smart. He's been in the business forever. And my literary agent, Deborah, who's also a really good editor, they were concerned because I told them that I was writing, and I'd written like 150 pages, and I hadn't gotten to the movie yet. They were concerned. Isn't this a book about a movie? Where is the gall darn movie? And I was following my gut. I was following a formula because the Andy and Don book, I did a biography of Andy Griffith, a smaller one, but a modest biography also of Don Knotts. I linked them up and then told their lives back and forth and together. And then the payoff in the middle of that book is the majesty of the Andy Griffith Show,
right?
Which is the middle 50% of the book. And that worked. So this book, I felt like something I wanted to do again, and people liked it. So I did the same thing. I told Belushi's story. I told Aykroyd's story. I connected them up. I told their stories together. And then the big payoff, again, it's like the middle 100 pages of this book is the film. And I go way deep on the film, but I didn't want to just write about the film. I felt like, and I think you appreciated this as a reader, I hope you did, that the film makes so much more sense.
Oh, yeah.
Once you understand where it's coming from and where they're coming from, right?
Yeah. I had a limited understanding of their backgrounds, more on Belushi than I did Aykroyd.
Yeah, me too.
Even though they were very different backgrounds, there were a lot of similarities there too.
I think it's true that it's deceiving. Like they seem so different. Like Laurel and Hardy, one of them's skinny and tall.
Yeah.
Kind of detail-oriented, regimented, Mr. Detail, and the other one's Mr. Fuck It. That's what Belushi's own words.
Yeah.
He's short. He's got that. What's that mesomorph? He's a football guy.
Yeah.
he's a wreck, just like doesn't even have an ID on him. He tries to go across the border into Canada without so much as a driver's license. He doesn't carry anything with him. He's just a big, like, Tasmanian devil of a man.
Right.
But there's so much similarity. I mean, so much. I mean, you talk about like DNA, their DNA is so similar. They both were musical guys when they were young, were in bands, both loved the rock and roll and the blues and stuff. And then they both became performers, first serious, then got into comedy. They both were these kind of wiseacres who would improvise and kind of come up with silly stuff and stray from the script and would get in trouble. They both wind up in Second City, the great improv troupe from Chicago, in different places, one in Canada, one in the United States. They both wind up in Saturday Night Live, the founding cast. I just saw the Boston Globe is doing like a bracket of who's the all-time greatest SNL, and very impressed and surprised, frankly, that both Belushi and Aykroyd made the final four.
Oh,
I would have expected Belushi, but not Aykroyd. He usually comes out like top 10, but not top
yeah.
four. He deserves, I think, to be.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But anyway, so you got that. That's right. They have a ton in common. I mean, genetically, they're 95% similar, but the differences are fascinating.
And I was surprised too about after they had met the friendship they formed. I always figured it was a showbiz friendship or showbiz connection. I didn't realize that they were such good friends.
I think it's really helpful to compare back to Andy and Don. And what I learned from Andy and Don is I think they or their friends refer to it as a Hollywood friendship, which is it's very intense. Andy and Don, the most important piece of their friendship was the 5 years when they were together every day, all day, 12 hours at a stretch, making this show together. That was the huge bond. It's kind of like the dudes you hung out with in high school and
Yeah,
you're in the gauntlet with them every day for 4 whole years and you're really friends after that. So that's the connection I would say is between Andy and Don, and then Belushi and Aykroyd. They were thrown together for this really intense SNL experience. They were in the same room, they were in the same process closer to 24/7 during the days when they were putting the show together every week. And that also brought them probably quite close to the other people on the show, but especially to each other.
yeah.
That's a Hollywood friendship. So it almost didn't matter how much they'd known each other before. After that intense period of working together on SNL, they were very closely bonded.
Supporting T-Bone's Prime Cuts on the Other Side podcast gives you interesting inside views from the talk space where musicians matter. Go to tbpcpodcast.com and click the donate button. All contributions are much appreciated. Once they decided to make the Blues Brothers, how did they get permission from the city of Chicago?
Well, so what happened was Chicago hadn't really hosted films. I'm from there, and
Mhm.
I don't remember hardly any films being made in Chicago, and there were hardly any because Mayor Daley, the older Mayor Daley,
Right.
50s, had put the kibosh on it because somebody had portrayed like corrupt cops, and that was it. So Daley's like, "You're out, you're out." It was like it was Archie Bunker was the mayor.
Yeah.
And so there's no films, almost no films made. And I don't remember any. I mean, like I think there was like Cooley High School and like I think My Bodyguard, but hardly anything.
Right.
But then he died, and then Bolandic is mayor, and then Mayor Byrne had just become mayor, and she really wasn't fond of Mayor Daley's cronies because she was the first female mayor in Chicago, and they gave her a very hard time. And I would say by modern standards, they were pretty damned misogynist toward her, called her
Right.
any but B word
Yeah.
worse. And like I remember Mike Royko, the columnist, kind of hectoring her and just belittling her. So she was pissed off, and pissed off specifically at Mayor Daley's cronies.
Yeah.
So I think, loved the idea of reopening the film industry. She didn't care, and loved the idea that this film crew said they were going to go march a convoy across Richard J. Daley Plaza and sort of lay waste to it. I think she found that amusing.
I think that I worked for Steve Cropper for 10 years. And so he's told me certain things about the movie, and he told me that early on, the studio told Dan that they were going to have to hire actors and make it look like they could play or teach them to play. He said, no, he said, we're going to take the whole band. And they told him no. And he said, well, then you don't get a movie. And that's what Cropper, how he related to me. And that's how he got all the men. He said he fought for them hard.
Wait, so you're talking about because the actual musicians, the ones from Memphis and the ones from SNL, of course, are all crack musicians.
Oh yeah. But they weren't actors. The studio
Oh,
wanted to hire actors
I see. And
to pretend they could play or teach them to play.
that's funny because all I heard was that story was from Landis telling me, John Landis, the director, telling me that he was fine with having those musicians there. He thought it
Oh
was,
yeah.
I think he thought it was hilarious. And I love the scenes with Dunn and Cropper, just kind of deadpanning. I love that he didn't ask them to try to act. He just told them to be themselves. And it's kind of cute. And then when like Willie Hall, the drummer,
Yeah.
he has a few great moments in there, but
Yeah.
Landis just said, don't worry about it. Just read your lines. And so you can tell they're not actors, but they're great. I love the lines that the musicians deliver.
I love well, I won't repeat it here, but what he says about the uh where's our money? And then I also love Duck talking about the go piss into gasoline. I always thought that was hilarious.
The one guy in that band who I think had some chops to act was Murph from
Yeah,
the Stones. Murph had been on Second City. I think he even overlapped a little bit with Belushi, and he'd done some actual acting work. So you can tell he can act. Like
yeah.
he could actually act a little bit.
If you just tell a little bit about how that all came together, how they decided to make a movie and all that.
Yeah, well, you have to go back, set your mind back to 1978, and Belushi became a huge star. I mean, he was already big from SNL, but nobody from the primetime players was that big. I mean,
Right.
some were bigger than others. None of them were huge. But then Belushi went and made Animal House, and he was like the lead animal. He was Bluto, and just he is that movie. My wife Sophie was watching it again recently, and just was amazed at how he just owned every scene he was in. And so he was that movie made him, and he made that movie. He was a huge star by the summer of '78 when it came out. And so, in terms of Hollywood talk, there was no question there was going to be another Belushi movie. And the only question is what the movie was going to be. And Belushi could have done anything. He could have said, I want to make a movie of me and Aykroyd doing whatever, because they were besties by that point. But what he wanted and what he and Aykroyd were really into that year was these Blues Brothers characters. And they'd been talking about and scheming to have some kind of musical combo all the way back to when they met, which I think was in '74. And they do a little bit on one of the first episodes of SNL in like early '76 in season one,
Hmm.
first season of SNL. They come on stage as bees
Right.
and sing King Bee, which I think Lauren thought was hilarious. But then they kind of shelve the characters. But then Belushi comes back from making Animal House, and he's met this cat named Curtis Salgado, who's a pretty big blues guy and is in a band with an up and comer named Robert Cray. And they kind of teach Belushi the blues and get him really into the blues. So he comes back from making Animal House, and then he and Aykroyd are both, because Aykroyd's already a huge blues hound.
Yeah.
Then the two of them are just all they want to do is the Blues Brothers, almost to the point where they almost could have left it. I wouldn't have been surprised if they left SNL. They cared so much about these Blues Brothers characters, and so that became the movie. And it's weird because if you're in Britain or Australia where there's huge fandom for this movie, all of those people think that the Blues Brothers was created as a movie, like that the
Right.
character didn't
Yeah.
exist before it. But in fact, the weird, bizarre truth is that all they were was these characters from SNL, which you and I probably saw on SNL as just a one-off act.
Yeah.
And Aykroyd was tasked with writing the script and writing a story, and he came up with a hilarious, goofy story about this orphanage and this tax bill and getting the band back together. And I've seen the original script, which is like 300 pages, and it's like this, it would have been like 5 hours of movie or something. But Landis kind of whittled it down into something filmable. But Aykroyd deserves credit for the fact that there's
Oh
any
yeah.
story at all, because he came up with it out of his head, basically.
It's funny to me because I never thought about it. I never even put it together that but a Catholic orphanage wouldn't have been taxed.
Yes.
But I never thought that in terms of the movie until I read it in the book. I was like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense.
Were you a DJ in like 78, 79?
Oh no, I graduated from high school in '83.
Oh, okay. You're my age. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Neither of us was old enough. Well, if you had been in the music business already in the late 70s, they were livid about the Blues Brothers.
Oh yeah,
It's a really weird thing. And it took one of the interviewers like you on a podcast weeks ago to say this, but it didn't occur to me that how weird this was, that you had these two guys who were television comedians with no demonstrated musical chops really whatsoever. I mean, yeah, they could do like karaoke quality singing, but they weren't like Hillary Duff. They weren't like Disney, trained singers or whatever. They weren't
yeah,
Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake. And then they suddenly decided to reinvent themselves. Like, we're going to have a band and it's going to be serious. And we're going to play Universal Amphitheater as a serious musical act with Steve Cropper opening up for Steve Martin. And we're going to go on tour and we're going to make a record. An interviewer made this point, which that was kind of unprecedented. Can you think of another example of something
I
as weird?
can't.
I mean, there's crossovers. Keanu Reeves was in a band. I ran into him once in a practice room in LA. Kevin Bacon has a band, but this was weird. Like in 78, you and I, as like middle school students or
Yeah,
whatever, watched these guys we knew from SNL make a record and it goes number one and they're like serious. And then are going to go on tour. And it was just weird. And we were, and so there was some question whether it was going to, was it serious? Was it a joke? And that's kind of the intro to the book. They go on the
yeah.
show and everybody's like, what is this? Anyway, I digress. I just thought you'd find that interesting because
Oh yeah,
music business, and they got really lambasted in like Rolling Stone and like the Berkeley Barb, the indie papers, alternative papers, and on the radio, like, what do these jokers think they're doing? Covering
yeah.
black blues classics.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the music because I mean, as a kid, I was well 15 or so when it came out, 14, 15. Uh, it was really funny to me, but then I actually started getting into the music more. And I was going to say, I did what you did. After the movie, I went and bought the best of Sam and Dave because I
That's
saw
exactly what I
I
did.
saw that 8 track in the car. And
Yeah,
I said, well, I got to go check that out. And then that all led to years later, I got deep into Stax and all those things. And what can you tell me about the music? Because they may have got criticized at the time, but
yeah.
those artists were actually glad to be there. And even afterwards, said, well, you say in your book about how James Brown was it or Ray Charles.
We owe
One
them,
of them,
man.
one of them said, yeah, we owe him, and
So I was, because in the current climate right now, 2000, what is it, 24, if I wrote a book asserting that, oh, the Blues Brothers were great, blah blah blah, somebody would come in and say, hey, wait a second, this is
yeah,
like cultural appropriation, man. This is ridiculous. Well, the good thing for me as the writer is that happened. They were
yeah,
accused of all stuff in 1978. They were accused of being
yeah,
racist. They were accused of cultural appropriation. It's interesting that all of those sensibilities were very much at play. When the record came out, there was a whole bunch of withering criticism. What do these clowns think they're doing playing these black blues classics? And then when the film came out, it came all over again. Um, and so when the movie came out, because the book focuses more on the movie, it was like, how dare they bring in Aretha Franklin and James Brown and Ray Charles as like bit actors
yeah,
for this movie that stars these two white guys? And that's a very valid point. But
yeah,
but then get back to what I said 10 minutes ago, that this was going to be the next Belushi film. There wasn't going to be another John Belushi film without it starring John Belushi. It was, whatever the film was going to be, it was going to be a
yeah.
John film. So in other words, they had to make it a Blues Brothers film. And it was, I think, to the credit of John Landis and Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, they brought in their heroes basically and just filled the screen with them at every opportunity, right? I think that's partly why they wore the glasses. They wanted to be in the background
Yeah.
and watch Aretha do her thing. And yes, that was like, that's the reason I wrote the book, actually. When John Landis told me there was like the secret real mission from God was not the orphanage. The real mission from God was Aykroyd, Belushi, and Landis. And the whole gang wanted to raise the profile of some of their heroes. And that they did, because after the film, Belushi was so at the center of the zeitgeist at that time.
Yeah.
If he said, go listen to the Dead Kennedys, a lot of people were going to go
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So when he said, go listen to Aretha Franklin, go listen to James Brown, they started playing bigger venues. You can look on setlist.com and you can see they're playing bigger venues after the movie than before.
Mm-hmm.
And not all, but most of them were quoted in different, like Rolling Stone or People Magazine, very genuinely saying, hey, we owe these guys, they definitely helped us. And again, you and I were in middle school, but the music industry was tilting big time toward disco, to the point that the Stones and Rod Stewart are doing like disco songs. It was really pervasive, and arenas were filled with arena rockers, like REO, Speedwagon, and Kiss and stuff. And so it was a hard time for the Soul Survivors, and it became a somewhat easier time after the film came out.
You wrote a great article in USA Today about what the mission of God really was. I'll link to it in the show notes because everybody needs to read that. Talking about disco and everything. Me being a lifelong Detroit Tiger fan, I was watching the night of the Disco of Demolition because it was a doubleheader. So they picked it up at like 6 o'clock. It was about halfway through the game one, and then we're going to show all the game two. And George Kell and Al Kaline were just dumbfounded by what was going on out there. It was crazy.
I think the players for the Tigers, was it Tigers Cubs?
Tigers White Sox.
The players were wearing batting helmets out on the field.
Yeah.
There was records flying through the air, and I think the players' wives were in some jeopardy.
Yeah.
Mostly these shirtless dudes. Man, was like Mark Fidrich there? Wasn't he? He was a Tiger, wasn't he?
Well, he was in 76 and he got hurt in 77. He came back a little bit, but I can't remember. I don't think he was active then. I remember that Milt Wilcox was supposed to start game two, and he wanted to know if he got credit for a 9-0 shutout because of the forfeit.
It was mayhem, and I'm not sure if I watched it. I don't remember because I was a Cub fan, but I knew about it. I remember I knew about it. They were talking about it on the radio. I mean, Steve Dahl, the DJ, put it on, and all the DJs. In fact, I'm going to do an interview shortly, and I don't know, next week or something, with one of the big time Chicago broadcasters from that era, Bob Surratt. And I'm eager to know if I think he might have already been in the business in 78, 79. I'd be interested to see what he remembers about that night, that day.
You can help support this podcast by visiting tbpcpodcast.com/shop and selecting an iconic T-Bones Prime Cuts mug. That website again is tbpcpodcast.com/shop.
I was also surprised to read in the book that no two takes of James Brown singing were the same. And that's why he really couldn't lip sync, because he was always doing it different. So he had to do it live. It just blew my mind.
Yeah. Aretha too. She struggled with the lip syncing. I think they just did it through very clever editing. Also, she couldn't remember the words.
That was hilarious. Yeah.
It's kind of funny because it's like her second or third or fourth best known song. And I guess the sound guy wrote them on whiteboards.
Yeah.
Couldn't read them because she didn't have her glasses. But I feel for them because I can't imagine what it would be like lip syncing and making a video.
Right.
And I played in cover bands for years, and I always struggled with lyrics. I always had to have little cheat sheets.
Yeah.
my son was just asking me the provenance of my best guitar. I've got a Les Paul custom from the late 70s, which is probably worth something, and he was asking me like, suddenly he's interested in that stuff now that he's a young adult. Yeah, just like get little prompts.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought I was doing my job if I could get, so I would do something, we do like 4 sets with my cover band down in Florida. If I could get all of the prompts, all of the cues
Yeah.
on like one sheet of paper, both sides, then I thought, well, this is reasonably professional.
Yeah. What can you tell us about the mall scene and the fact that they found an empty mall in 1979? There weren't very many empty malls I could think of.
Right. So like the Stranger Things show, posits this idea that was the peak of mall culture, probably late 70s, early 80s. And yeah, there weren't many dead malls because they were like a new thing, a new-ish thing.
Right.
Dawn of the Dead and all that, that was mall culture. And because that's a dead mall. But yeah, they found a dead mall. It had succumbed to crime. It was in a pretty high crime, low, high poverty suburb. And so they built it all up and filled it up with real merchandise from real Chicago names. Like if you're from there, you recognize like RJ Grunts. I mean, and Bigsby and Crothers, those were local names. And then they just proceeded to destroy it all. Over several days of filming. Nobody really remembered exactly how many days, but several days. And I thought this was kind of amusing. Safety protocols were different in the 70s. And
Yeah.
this is not to cast any aspersions. I think was the case for all of these auteur filmmakers. Things were just looser then. So they're inside this sealed up vault because it was it's supposed to be a night scene.
Right.
So everything's sealed. And there's like burning rubber and belching, probably leaded gasoline exhaust and rotting vegetables, because there's a Jewel supermarket in there and they didn't change up the vegetables. So everything's rotting. And so the place just reeked and was probably toxic. So every like 15 minutes, the whole crew would like file outdoors and just, fresh air. And it is to their great credit, there was no real injuries in that shoot, even though there's real cars really speeding around. There's no CGI. There's one shot, if you watch the scene where the guy says, "Do you have a Miss Piggy?" And then the car bursts through.
Right.
And there's a really athletic Black woman in like I think she's in red slacks, and she kind of dives out of the way. That was like very close. I mean, you can tell. If you look closely, it'll make you shudder how close it was that she almost got clipped, but she didn't. And there was like one dude who had like one little tiny abrasion because he stepped in the wrong place. But other than that, it went pretty well, apparently. I've never heard of nobody's come forward that I know of saying, "Oh, I got really, banged up in that shoot." So it worked out in the end.
The stuff at the mall, of course, but what about some of the stunts in this movie?
The one that's gotten written about a lot since the book came out is in Milwaukee, because I did a book talk at Boswell's Books in Milwaukee, and they really love the movie up there, and they really pride themselves that one big scene was shot there, which is the road to nowhere.
Yeah.
The Nazis go off the edge of the road basically and just fall. And so that scene, the road that ended, that was in Milwaukee downtown. I've been on that road. And then them falling, the Nazi station wagon falling, that's the train. That was shot in Chicago along Lakeshore Drive where the S-curve used to be. And then the Nazis landing and like comically landing in the pavement and falling through it. That was shot in Universal Studios in LA. But the Wisconsiners are really proud of their role in that scene. And, that was a death-defying scene. In fact, the Bluesmobile, the stunt driver, he did it too slow the first time. It didn't look convincing, so Landis wanted him to speed up. And then he did it a little too fast and went a little too far. And he ended up dangling over the edge. And luckily, nothing happened. They got caught on some those like steel rods, like iron rods that kind of screwed. So nothing happened, but it could have fallen and like probably hurt somebody. So yeah, and all this was real. There's no effect. I mean, the only quote unquote effects were like in that goofy scene with where the Blues Brothers kind of vaults back and defies gravity.
Yeah.
That was at one point in that shot. There's like a 3-foot long fake car that somebody literally threw That was what passed for special effects back then.
I was always taken by them dropping the pinto too.
Oh, that, and they dropped it
Yeah.
12 feet or more. They used the Hancock building for perspective. I think I used that shot in the photo. I hope you got, did you get the real book? You didn't
Yeah.
get,
Yeah.
yeah, you can see the picture. It's great. I mean, that was a beautiful shot.
Didn't Landis want to go up higher, and they said no, 1,200 feet is enough.
What Bob Weiss, the producer, told me was Landis, he's probably a genius, Landis is,
Oh
but he
yeah.
didn't have a good conception of distance. And
Right.
so he didn't know how many feet was high enough. Weiss did have a better conception of it. So he said, well, look, here's how tall the Hancock building is. And Landis is like, okay, well, that's about that high then, you know. And the two of them, Weiss, the producer, Landis, the director, disagreed about exactly how high they dropped it. I'm guessing the helicopter is probably a little above the top of the Hancock, the two, antennae,
Yeah.
and then dropped it, far enough that the camera could shoot it falling past the entire height of the Hancock building.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, what was your favorite non-musical scene in the film?
Oh, this changes every time I do an interview, so don't quote me on this.
Yeah.
But lately, I think the funniest scene, just for yucks, for me is probably the one in the Shea Paul, the fancy restaurant, which is
Yeah.
a great like class conflict scene. John Landis does great class conflict. I mean, Animal House is all about class conflict, rich wankers versus poor schmucks, basically. And in that Blues Brothers scene, Elwood and Jake Blues are just clearly these destitute characters,
Yeah.
barely, probably smell bad and they look bad and they're poor and broke and living in a shotgun apartment in a tenement building. And they go into this, upper crust North Suburban Splendor Gold Coast restaurant, which apparently in real life was kind of dingy. Like the assistant director told me that when they shown like proper studio like set, production lights inside the Shea Paul, it was like filthy. And people paying like top dollar. I never dined there, but so that's a great scene of them throwing the shrimp and how,
Yeah.
that's my favorite for pure yucks value. And Pee Wee Herman's in it too.
Oh yeah.
God rest
Yeah.
his soul.
He's a waiter, isn't he?
He's a waiter, yeah.
Yeah.
The script called for a very gay waiter. That's not Pee Wee. There's another waiter who has like a mustache and who's very flamboyant. And then Pee Wee, who's probably also supposed to be a gay waiter, comes up, and they're all very disapproving of everything that Jake and Elwood are doing. What's your favorite scene, musical or otherwise?
It may not be my favorite, but it's the most memorable for me. Is the scene where Murph and the Magic Tones are playing, and Jake and Elwood come there to see him, and that's when he says, "Where's our money?" And all that. Murph and the Magic Tones. And he said he's talking about the monkey suits and everything they're wearing. He said, "You're still wearing the same clothes you wore 3 years ago," and all that. That whole thing just cracks me up.
That's where the whole band gets introduced, so it's a cool scene. And also the cinematographer Stephen Katz told me, so the movie mostly is very noir. I mean, you're kind of noir, black and white and
Yeah,
contrasts, not a lot of color, right? In
yeah,
most, it's almost a black and white film, and very sharp contrast between the darks and the lights. But in that scene, it changes and becomes this very colorful
yeah.
1970s, cheesy
Shag carpet and stuff.
lounge scene. And Stephen Katz really played up that contrast. So that I'm not surprised that stood out because the scene does stand out. It's really different from the
Yeah.
other scenes in the film.
What can you tell me about Aykroyd and Belushi's friendship?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of similar to Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, subjects of my earlier book, in that with Andy and Don, there wasn't a huge amount of material of them being together other than this show, the Andy Griffith Show. So by the same token, with Belushi and Aykroyd, you have them together in the Blues Brothers, and that is a marvelous document of their, historic friendship and partnership. You have some SNL sketches that show them together, not as many as you'd think.
Right.
I think for the most part, their friendship played out kind of behind the scenes. They owned properties near each other on Martha's Vineyard, and they were like constant companions from when they, especially, well, certainly from when they both joined the SNL cast in '75 until Belushi's death in, I think, '82. They were together as often as they could possibly be. And I think Aykroyd probably wound up being the closest friend Belushi ever had, apart from Judy, his beloved wife. Judy's great. So Judy was Belushi's soulmate and boss in the home. Aykroyd was both of those things in work and in the creative aspect of Belushi's life. It was a beautiful friendship. And I mean, it was an extremely important friendship, but it's funny that the Blues Brothers is like the one document we really have of that rapport between these two great guys. Again, right now at the Boston Globe, they're like, doing this Final Four bracket where arguably Aykroyd and Belushi are two of the greatest SNL people ever. And their friendship is extremely important. But this movie is important as one of the few documents of that friendship. And it's a very important friendship. It was at the heart, at the core of the SNL project, the original founding cast of SNL. I mean, Gilda is amazing. Bill Murray's amazing. Chevy Chase was pretty great. Lorraine Newman was awesome. Garrett Morris was terrific. But that friendship between Belushi and Aykroyd is super important and probably is the heart, the beating heart of that show. So, yeah, I mean, now as you mention it, that friendship is awfully important. And I think this film is where it really has its finest expression.
Absolutely. Daniel, where can the people find you?
Oh, me or the book?
Well, both.
Yeah. I've got a website, which is my name, which is danieldevizé.com. I write for USA Today, but that's like work stuff. I mean, it's a lot of fun. But the book, you can find it if you just like Google Blues Brothers book, you'll find it. And there's signed copies actually for anybody who cares at Boswell's in Chicago, Seminary Books in Chicago. I said Boswell's in Milwaukee, sorry. Fountain Books in Richmond, Politics and Prose in DC, and Acapella in Atlanta. I've been to all those stores and all of them have signed books, which is kind of cool. But then, of course, Amazon and everybody else has it as well.
Everybody, you need to get this book. Need to get it. It's it was more than what I expected because it's funny, it's very informative, but it's also heart touching. And then, the ultimate, demise of Belushi and all that. It's sad too. It just runs the whole gamut.
I'm glad you liked it. It was a lot of fun to write. I was trying to make it funny and also moving, but mostly Belushi and Aykroyd are just tremendously funny guys, and I wanted to get that across.
Well, thank you for this, Daniel, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye. I'd like to thank Daniel Devizé for all his time today. Be sure to go to danieldevizé.com. That's Daniel, DEVISE.com for more information. For copies of this book, you can go to Amazon or pick it up anywhere good books are sold. If you're using Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave me a 5-star review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell. They really help the channel. Also, be sure to go to tbpcpodcast.com and click that PayPal button to donate. We'll see you next time.